answering Azure related queries, so we can get relevant answers for it. As we keep asking more questions, it understands our workload details, it understands what we are looking for, and the next set of responses will be more appropriate, more mapped to our expectations. Okay, so this was the first environment, first resource that we, first module that we discussed. It took slightly longer because we are laying down the foundations for our environment. Let me run through the first lab exercise, what will be involved over here, and while showcasing some of these resources, have I already covered those points, or is something pending over there? Let me verify that. One second, let me share this link on the chat. So when I'm walking through the lab steps, you all can take a look at it. So enable application resilience with auto failover groups. It says, Om Prakash, you need to have VS Code with C# toolkit. Get into Azure portal, go to PowerShell, okay, AZ group create, SQL server create, mention your primary server, secondary server, SQL DB create. Now most of these steps that you will see is performed by using the CLI commands, which is another way of creating our resources, another way of creating our members. That should not be a problem. Let's go to the next step over here. Integrate with application code. So here if you see the application code, we have new .NET console, .NET add package. What is your failover group? Specify the name of the resource, the credentials over here. Change the details within the configuration file. And if you see the code being mentioned, it is picking this information from the config file. So what is the primary server? Partner server as secondary server. So when we are writing this query, the query will be mapped to the group rather than to a specific server, right? So if you see, both the servers have been mentioned and the database is mentioned as a shared resource, which could be referred from primary server or secondary server. So in our case, we have created our replica over here, and then if you see the next step, AZ SQL failover set primary. What is our failover group, our resource group over here? Right. So this is our first lab implementation. So now the challenge which I have is the resource which I have currently created is focusing on using the browser, using the Azure portal for creating all these resources. Just give me a moment. Let me remove these resources, and what we'll do is we'll go back to our CLI environment over here using the Cloud Shell. We have a brief understanding of creation of these resources. Let's go to our lab environment. AZ group create. I would prefer doing this in Notepad. AZ group create, name of the resource group. I would prefer using shortcuts over here. Name of the resource group is data RG, data resource group -L. Central India. This will help me create the resource group. In our case, we already have the resource group ready, so we can skip the first step. Let's go ahead with the second one. AZ SQL Server create, name of the primary server. This could be a problem for me because here I'll have to use unique names. I hope this is a unique name. Shortcut for resource group is -G, which is data resource group. As far as location is concerned, I don't see a challenge there. SQL admin. Let me mention the password here. Okay, so this will be my password. So I already have the resource group. Let me create my SQL Server instance. So while I edit the second one, I'm already onto the CLI resource. So while I edit the next one, I already have the first SQL Server instance in creation. SQL Server create, SQL Server v2, name of the resource group, location Southeast Asia. So you will see I'm doing the same step which I did in UI. The only difference is here I am creating my resources by using the CLI command. Is the first one done? No, still in progress. So first machine is ready. Let me go for the second machine. While this is getting created, let's go for the third one, third command over here. AZ SQL DB create, name of the resource group. So you see, if you use the shortcuts -G for resource group, as far as server is concerned, this is my primary server. This is my primary server, AdventureWorks LT, sample name, service objective. Now, there are quite a few resources which will get created automatically. So I have both my machines ready, both my servers ready. Now we are creating a database over here. So you'll realize using PowerShell, using CLI commands, Azure SQL failover group create, name of your failover group, OMP sync group. Now these things are now within the environment, so I don't have to worry too much. Within these are not accessible outside as a connection string aspect. Data resource group. What is my primary server over here? When I say primary server, in sense, first time when there is an insert happening, it should connect to which server. Now whatever we are mentioning over here as part of CLI commands, when we are creating a sync group, we are mentioning this same details from the UI as well. While this is in execution, let me refresh it here. So you'll see there are two server instances, V1, V2, AdventureWorks LT, and then we are creating a failover group. So once it is done, there is another command they have mentioned for. Now whatever commands that we are trying out over here, when you go for your exam, okay, you all will need to perform all these steps within 2 hours of our time, right? When we are going for the applied scale exam, so it is required that we go and practice these things within the free trial or a scalable lab kind of environment, so that within that given line you are able to perform that task easily. Just give it a moment. Right. So if you see this, this is the new database because I had cleaned whatever I created earlier using the UI. Now all these things have got created by using the CLI commands. So you can see V1, V2 over here, respective regions that I have mapped: Central India, South India, Southeast Asia. The only difference is earlier I did not use CLI commands. Now I am performing those activities using the CLI commands. So once you know the concept, once you know how these things are working, it becomes easier for us. Now this is a problem for me. So it says, Om Prakash, you need to go to Visual Studio Code, create a new application. Just give me a moment. Go to D drive. It should be easier. So I can do it through PowerShell. Create a new application here, SQL APP. Yeah, so this should be fine. Now inside this I can perform my next set of steps, that is creating my application. Sorry, once again, we need to have .NET installed on your machine. So all these things I already have within my environment. So on your system, if you all don't have it, you all will have to install .NET framework, make sure you have right versions being mapped. So I'm adding these packages over here. So this is the NuGet, respective NuGet packages required for connecting to our data source. Is it done? It's taking some time. How about my SQL resource? Is it done? Let me verify that. Yeah, this part is ready. Let me minimize it. Perfect. So my replica is there. 1 second. OMP sync group, databases, subscription. Perfect. So this makes sense for me. Let me proceed ahead. Package adding is done. Okay. So now let me proceed ahead. So once I have got this resource ready, it says go to VS Code. I already have VS Code installed on my system. Right. So this is my VS Code environment. Create app settings.json file. I don't have one. App settings.json. So if you are aware about how to work with VS Code, that should not be a problem. Connection string, failover group dot, okay, not, I don't think that should be a problem. OMP sync group is the name which I have given. So if you see, I'm not referring it from a database name. OMP sync group dot database dot windows dot net AdventureWorks LT. Let me mention my password here. Let's go to CS Proj. Close this. SQL client, they have referred 5.0. I am not sure if there could be some issue. Let me not take a chance. I have commented the previous one, so in case something goes wrong, we can go back to the earlier version. have .NET 9.0. Let me go to program.cs. Okay, so if you see the I have the required assembly reference. Giving me an issue for the configuration builder. Okay, not a problem. I don't have time on hand right now to rectify this. We go to program.cs. I'm hard coding it just to make sure we don't lose on time. Sorry guys, just give me a minute. Okay, so I have made the required change. This should be fine. Let me go to the terminal. Okay, let me go ahead. .NET run. Connection was successfully established, but there was an error in the login process. So earlier one, don't worry with that. The reason why I'm saying don't worry, because when you are using something called a serverless, right, this will be a problem because the connection may not be active immediately. The second error that you see, this is the actual error. So it says, Om Prakash, this particular IP address is not allowed on the firewall, which is decent enough, no problem. So I know how to manage that. So here we can go to our database. Here we have something called a set server firewall. We can go to set server firewall, and whatever IP address that we are getting there, we'll have to add that IP address. Okay. So once we have done that, let's check this up once again. So now you see, so it says this is the primary server, this is the secondary server, this is the database which I am connecting to, and what is the replication state which is there, right? So it is saying, so if you see the query here, what is the query? Get me the replication link status. So once we have got that information, we can specify the details here. Guys, does it make sense for you all? So whatever labs that we are doing here, these same labs you will have to perform inside the environment. So once you give your exam for the applied skill, you will get a virtual machine kind of environment there, and you should be able to execute these steps successfully. So in my case, like I was stuck with the connection string because there is a version change, right? All these things are taken care or handled inside the VM, so you don't have to worry for that. So you have the right .NET version inside that. So this was our first lab implementation. How do we create this availability group using the CLI commands, the sync group, and how do we fetch the information from here using our .NET code. I could do it quickly because I have been doing these things for quite some time. People who are new to this, you all will need to practice these things multiple times. Can you see it over here? Failover groups. So I have OMP sync group over here on my server. So there is a primary server, there is a secondary server. So when you write any of your database queries, so it will check where that request is coming from and which is the nearest region for it. If the primary server has failed, it will automatically go for the secondary server. So before I proceed ahead, let's take up few questions over here. So what is the primary difference between single database and elastic pool deployments? I would want all of you all to participate in this. Go ahead, mention your answer for the same. So what will be the answer for the first question? Single database model allows allocation for storage, compute, group of databases, while elastic pool model manages each database individually. Or the second option, single database model, there are own dedicated resources. Elastic pool has shared resources. Krishna says it's B. How many of you all agree with Krishna? Anyone else? Anybody? Any other answers for the first question? Abasi also agrees to Krishna. So both of you are right. Thank Nias. Let's go for the next question. How does the hyperscale service tier affect the time needed to create database backups or scale up and down? So what would be the answer for the second one? It increases the time based on volume of data. It requires constant amount of time regardless of the volume of data in the database. It's no longer dependent on volume of data in the database. Anyone? Okay. Krishna says for the second one, it is first answer, that is first option. Anyone else? Any other answers, or if you all agree with Krishna? Abasi says it should be the third one. It is no longer dependent on volume of the data. Anybody else? Any other answer for the second one? Okay, so I can see three people, three answers. Okay, let's see. Nias, you are right. No, sorry, Abasi is right. It's no longer dependent on the volume of data. It's no longer dependent on the volume of the data in the database, because the moment you write the data, it already starts doing the replication. So even if there is a large volume of data, it will not matter. Let's go for the third one. What is the main difference between geo-replication and auto failover groups? So geo-replication uses synchronous replication, auto failover is asynchronous, or both of them are asynchronous, or is it the third one? Okay, Krishna 3B, Nias is saying it's A. Let's check the answer. It's the third answer. Geo-replication uses asynchronous replication, while auto failover uses a synchronous replication. So it's the third answer, because for auto failover to happen, the data has to be replicated immediately. It cannot be done later. Not bad. Let's go to the next module, that is developed for Azure SQL Database. So we saw a quick example earlier where we have got the foundational resources created. Thank you folks. Let's proceed ahead. So in the previous example, we saw an implementation being done where we got the basic SQL data client, which is the primary package for connecting to our database. So if you look at the configuration of resources, the primary steps involved over here is creating a resource group, creating a server, right? Creating a database. So three things that we had done earlier. The fourth thing that you saw when you were stuck or facing a problem, that was configuring firewall rules. So you can configure these rules on your server. You can configure these rules within your database as well. Now many times you will get this data from the error that you are receiving. So as far as the error is concerned, that error will specify what is the IP address being mapped, and that IP address is what you have to mention on the firewall, right? Same thing that we did in the previous example, correct? So once it comes to your creation of these kind of projects within VS Code, we have seen that as an option, right? But if I have to automate these things, if you have to create these members, create these resources using your VS Code, integrate with GitHub Actions, right? Automate these processes using the DevOps environment. That's where we'll need to go for respective database project extension. We can add these extensions within our VS Code, right? So like how you have Azure extension, like how you have your other extensions being mapped, we can associate these extensions within our VS Code, and here we can have our resources installed using Azure Data Studio, right? And through this combination of both these members, we can initiate the project from any place. So if you look at the options available, so once you have this SQL database project being created, the core purpose that we are trying to achieve through this is how we can simplify the process of auto generating some of the code, especially when we are connecting with a database table, right? How we can auto generate or create some of these configurations in much more simpler manner. So once it comes to your project creation, we can add a connection over here and we can deploy the schema changes. So where is your local data available? C:/sales data. What data we would want to create on your Azure SQL environment. Now similar things can be done by using your database projects using the GitHub Actions, Azure DevOps. Guys, just give me 1 minute. I'll be back. So here, if you look at your projects available, here you have your SQL database migration projects. Any data that you want to move from your on-premises environment to Azure environment, or if you want to move resources from AWS into Azure environment, right? For all of them, we can leverage on database migration projects. This is one of the options which we have available. Okay, so using your SQL database projects within our on-premises environment, we can publish our resources onto the Azure environment, work with these members over here. Now once it comes to our automation of these resources using DevOps based resources and using relevant pipelines over here. So here what we can do is we can leverage on a pre-existing GitHub repository. We can create database project using VS Code and specify the CI/CD over here, continuous integration, continuous deployment. Folks who are not from DevOps background, my recommendation would be you all need not go into deep dive of DevOps, but you should have a brief understanding in terms of what is this GitHub Actions, what is continuous integration, what is the purpose of doing that, right? So here, to get a gist of these resources, we can go to DevOps organizations. Here we can go to DevOps organizations, login into your existing organization that you may have already created, or we can create a new organization over here. We can create a new organization over here. So in my case, I already have a lot of pre-existing organizations. Let me go for one of them. Right. So within my environment, here I can see resources for Azure boards, Azure repository. Azure repos is very similar to your GitHub repository. Then we have our respective pipelines for it. Right. So within the pipeline, whatever stages one would want to create, right, all these options will be available here. So when you're talking about SQL, can you see this? So Azure SQL database deployment, SQL Server database deploy using a DAC as a resource, right? So these are the steps which are involved within your pipeline. Meanwhile, if you are looking for GitHub actions, you can go to your GitHub repositories over here. Log in using your credentials. Log in using your credentials over here. You can create an action for this, and within this action we can go and specify SQL action. Says I don't have a pre-existing template for workflow. Would you like to create it on your own? Can you see this? So here you have Azure SQL deploy, run a SQL package, right? So the same member, that is DAC based deployment, you can see these resources available here. Now one issue can happen would be from perspective of Om Prakash, I am not seeing those actions over here. So what to do? Don't worry on that. So here we can go to something called as Azure DevOps Marketplace. Here you can go to Azure DevOps Marketplace. Same way you have GitHub Marketplace as well. And here what we can do is we can specify pipeline resources, which kind of extensions that you would want to add over here. Okay, SQL change automation. One second. Yeah, this would be the right one. Azure SQL, so Azure database deployment. This would be the right resource for you. So something which is not available, right? Something which is not available here, you can add these members and then it will be available to your organization, to your project. Okay, so you can see the SQL toolkit for Azure. So there are a number of options available on the marketplace. So you can add it into your specific project. Same way you have GitHub Actions Marketplace, and for this you don't need the GitHub Copilot subscription. Even with normal environment, right? So Azure SQL deploy. So any set of packages or resources that you want to add over here, you have pre-built action package available. So add this within your project so that once you go to your GitHub repository or your Azure DevOps environment, you should be able to see these members available there. Okay, so I hope this makes sense for you all. And again, let me reiterate the point. Once you are giving your exam, all these things will be available to you all in the scalable lab or in the lab environment. But when you are practicing these things, there you'll have to download these things and keep it ready so that you all can try these things out. So in your trial dev test environment or trial environment, you need to create these resources. So even when you are working with your on-premises environment or when you are working with your DevOps environment, in both these cases, what will remain consistent would be your connection string. So here if you see the options available, you have your server name, which will be the sync group environment, sync group name, database.windows.net, specify the credentials over here based on role based access control. So which user has permissions on specific table or the role that we are using over here, right? Based on that. So here if you see there is a user based permission admin. If there is a specific user, if that user has been given permissions on relevant tables, we can leverage on that, right? Any actions, activities being performed, we'll be able to see that in the auditing. So if anybody who has made those changes, modifications, if an application has made the modifications, all these details will be part of your audit logs. Just give me a minute. Let me go back to my SQL environment. So step number 1 that what needs to do is you can go to the auditing section over here. You can enable audits. On the server level, so right now if you see server level auditing is disabled, so we can enable auditing over here. And where do you want to save your audit data? So we can select our existing storage account or no 2025, this also is taken. Okay, what is the date today? Let me try this. So it's checking the name should be unique because the storage account will have a URL associated. Okay, so here I have storage account created, which will map to the audit information, audit details. And once we have enabled this audit, on the server level, we need to enable this on the database as well, right. So, two levels of audits, one on server level, is a two-step audit process. So, one on the server level and second on the database level. So, now I have my storage account available. So, any changes being made on respective resources, again this is looking for storage account in that particular location, because these two servers, one is in Central India, one in Southeast Asia. So, most of these admin tasks, this will be done by the database team, database administrators. So, they will manage these implementations. So, any changes performed by Microsoft, since it is a PaaS service, I would want to track that as well. So, once server level auditing is enabled, okay. So, we are done with this, enabling auditing on either levels, that is server level and also on the database level. So, once it comes to these audits, the core purpose of audit is information being saved, right details being saved, and all the activities being performed by the users, we are aware about it. It's taking some time to refresh because I have already enabled auditing on the server level and the client level as well. Let's proceed ahead. Right. So as far as role-based access control is concerned, this would be at two places. Right. So one is on the service instance level on the Azure portal, and second would be inside the SQL database where we mentioned about the login, where we mentioned about the users inside that. There are two places where we'll have RBAC. So once you have the resources being mapped, once you have the DevOps components being mapped, here we can perform these CI/CD operations, right? And if you look at the automation tasks, so apart from auditing, that is logging over here, we can set up alerts, performance monitoring, any kind of rollback strategies that one would want. Right? So those things we can do over here by going to the monitoring section. So if you see, so we have the alert rules. So from a SQL database perspective, which signals we want to capture. Now see this, blocked by firewall. Now some of these would be generic, some of these would be specific to our environment, and since we are using the PaaS service, right, so all administrative operations I want to capture that. Anybody trying to create the database, import database into SQL, into the server, successful connections, how many sessions are running right now, DTU limit, DTU percentage being used right now, what is the data input output which is there. So these are set of metrics that can be mapped over here. Now what is the difference that we have within these metrics and the activity logs? So activity log is more a verbose kind of environment, there is no number mapped to it, whereas if you see the metrics, all these metrics are numbers, these are numeric values, whereas activity log is the number of, is the operations being performed. So all administrative operations, these are actions which are being performed. So there may be number or there may not be a number here, but once it comes to metrics, each metrics will have a number associated. So that's the differentiator. Let me take blocked by firewall as one of the metrics parameter. So if total number of blocked members is 5, right, I want to raise an alert. So when you are raising an alert, what action one would want to perform? So here we can create an action group if we already have. If not, we can create a new action group. Action group, as the name suggests, there will be bunch of actions that one would want to perform. Group name, SQL actions, display name, let me mention the same, notifications over here. So you want to send an email, to a specific role, we can mention that. So I want to send email to all the owners, and there could be a possibility there are more than one owners. Let's go to actions. Let's perform an action over here, right? So if you see the actions available, so you have actions from perspective of automation runbook, invoking Azure function, webhook, right? So these could be these would be the set of actions that you have available here. So right now I'm just trying to invoke the notification, send an alert. Is it informational? Is it warning message? There are more number of blocked users that you have, and I want to raise that as a warning message. So this will help us create the respective alert. Now such kind of alert can be mentioned within your Azure environment, within your CI/CD that you are performing. If you see the screenshot over here, this is actually performed on the SQL Server instance within the Azure environment. Now some of these values that we have, these alert values that you're talking about, the firewall restrictions, these metrics value that you have, these values are also available in the Azure DevOps environment. So we can check for these values and perform set of actions over there. Okay, let's quickly discuss about the second lab over here. What are the steps involved? Configuring and deploying CI/CD pipelines. I may not be able to showcase the implementation here because I have a problem in connecting with my Azure DevOps environment and the Azure environment. I have run out of the free pipelines. So there is a free pipeline and there is a paid pipeline. I have already consumed my free pipeline options. So if you see the step number 1, creation of Azure SQL Database, I don't think that should be a problem that we have seen earlier in the previous exercise. The next aspect here would be setting up a GitHub repository, MySQL DB repo. We can connect this with our VS Code, do a git clone, right? And here what we are doing is we are associating this repository with our database project over here within our VS Code environment. I am not sure if I have this extension. Let me verify that. Okay, just give me a moment. Yeah, here if you see, enables user to develop and publish database. So I can go ahead, install this extension. The core purpose of this extension is to help us create these database resources, perform basic migration from on-premises environment to Azure cloud environment using a pre-built extensions within your VS Code, and then we can make it part of our project, package it within our code, and then use GitHub actions to perform these actions, or use Azure pipelines to perform these actions on your Azure environment. Okay, so I hope this is done. Yep. So once we have got the implementation done, we can go to our database projects, add a table over here. Right. So these are the extensions which I have. I don't have a connection as of now. Let me add a connection. It's taking some time. So once it gets installed, then we can try adding a connection with our SQL database, which is pre-existing onto our Azure environment. Okay, so once this is done, so whatever resources you are creating, whether it is employees table or any other resource that you are creating, all these resource mapping, all this resource mapping will be part of your script, part of your code that you are pushing onto the repository, right? So here if you see, we have steps like commit, push, and once you push this command, now you can run your GitHub actions and create these resources on Azure. Now there is one more challenge that you will see. Now the challenge over here is authentication. So how do you authenticate this GitHub resource or GitHub action that you have created to perform these creation of resource on your environment? That's where you have AZAD create. I'm not sure if anybody has used this command earlier. So people who have worked with Azure DevOps, they will be aware about this. AZAD create for RBAC, whatever name we want to mention, whatever role we want to mention, our subscription ID, name of our resource group. So here what we are saying is, I want to create a service principal on Azure Active Directory, AZAD create a service principal, and this service principal which is getting created should have a contributor permission on data resource group, because within this data resource group I have my database, which means this, so rather than the user going and creating this resource, it will be the application which is going and creating the resource, so making any kind of changes on that underlying database. So any kind of inserts, updates. So here we'll have to the subscription ID, subscription ID, resource group, data.rg. So this will help us to register the application within enter ID, and to that registered application we are giving permission. Now since we are using GitHub repository, we need to add these secrets over there under the project section. And if you see the next steps over here, we can have GitHub actions being created. No, this is not the right place. So where I can create this would be on my GitHub environment, right? So if I have a workflow being created, here I can go and mention that details. Okay, so any changes being made on the main branch contents read, use a runner which is Ubuntu latest, check out the code from the repository, SQL pack install. So before this I would have already downloaded the added the package over here if it is not already existing in the actions section. .NET tool install Microsoft.SQL package. Now where am I installing it? I am installing it on the underlying machine. The runner or the agent that I have, on that agent we'll have to install this member. Okay, so once this is being done, where do I have this credentials? So this credential is actually inside my settings section. Here under settings section, this is where I have all my credentials being stored. Secrets and variables. So this is where I'll have all my credentials being stored. So what I'm saying, refer to the credentials, which means I'm referring to the section over there. And once it is done, now in the credentials I'll have my Azure credentials, which will help me log into my current environment. And for doing this I already have done AZ-AD SP create, right? So that part is already being taken care. So once this is done, it will, and once this action is successfully executed, I should be able to see my table created by using Active Directory permissions given to that application. So guys, does it make sense to you all? What are the steps involved over here? Perfect, this is done. Okay, profile name, server name, how do you want to log in, what name should I give? OMP profile. Sorry, I don't want to use connection string over here. Guys, some prerequisites I already have. I already have Azure subscription. I already have the Azure extension being added over here. So for my functions, for my logic app, I have already been using some of these resources. In your case, if you are starting off with a fresh environment, that might take some time to set up these things. Takes some time. Just give me a minute. Still taking time. I don't know why it's not showing here. I'm already having the data being mapped. I already have my subscription on the Hotmail ID, and I'm already accessing it here. Tenant is something that you'll have to be careful about, but if you have a new account, that you don't have to worry. Okay. Database name. Yep. So if you see, I have all my tables available. Sales LT. So same steps which I can do on my Azure environment, I can see the results here as well within my VS Code. Right? So that's the purpose of using this extension over here. Okay, so let me go back to my presentation. So what we have discussed over here is two primary modules from the current environment, where we focused on the foundational aspects of how one can get started with Azure SQL Database. So quite a few who are new to the SQL Server environment, especially on the Azure platform, new in terms of SQL Server administration. So I hope you'll have got a gist of it. So what are the base entities or base resources that we have? From administration perspective, creation of resources, working with these members, right? So we have taken a good look to that. Along with this, we have also looked at two options from creating our virtual machine. So one is using a virtual machine and using a PaaS service, where we have Azure SQL Database. We have to create Azure SQL Server, and we have to create a database on it. We did not create managed instance because this is slightly expensive in nature, and that's not the focus of the current applied skill as well. We discussed about various options in terms of SKUs, what are the available resources that we have. Then we discussed about the DBA options, which a DBA would generally do within the on-premises environment, creation of members on the virtual machine. All those things are being mapped over here, created over here within as a out of the box features, right? And through that out of the box features, we are able to implement this smoothly. Then we discussed about the geo replication. We mentioned about how an application can smoothly access the resource. If the primary is down, it can automatically go to the secondary environment. Now, if people have experience within on-premises environment, they have used enterprise license, configured availability groups over there, the kind of effort which is required is much higher as compared to what we did today. So using set of basic CLI commands, we looked at how one can go and create a SQL Server failover cluster, right? So in normal English terms, on-premises terms, this is referred as SQL Server always on cluster. And this cluster had 2 servers inside it and a database being replicated within that environment, right? Which helps us to perform these actions, perform these activities. Then we saw a complete lab implementation over here. Then we went into development with SQL database and how one can leverage on VS Code using appropriate extensions, how one can bring in the perspective of DevOps pipelines using GitHub Actions, Azure pipelines, and manage this end-to-end implementation in a smooth fashion. Let's move ahead. So let's go to the knowledge check over here. So everyone who can help me with this, what is the role of firewall rules in Azure SQL Server? What will be the right answer? To create a unique server name, to specify which traffic is allowed or denied access to server, or generate a pseudo random integers. Anyone, any suggestion over here? Nia says it's B. Anybody else? Any other suggestions? Tanmay agrees to him. Surya also agrees to him. So I think there is more votes for B, that is which traffic is allowed. So if you remember, we mentioned the IP address of our local machine. Thank you guys. Thanks Sarvana. So here, if you go to the second question, what is the purpose of DAC-pack deployment? So while we are working with the Azure DevOps or within the GitHub Actions, both these places we saw DAC-pack. So it is used to create backup. It simplifies the process of deploying database changes by packaging things, or it is used for monitoring. Anyone? Any suggestions for the second question? Nia says it's B. Surya agrees to him. Anybody else? Any other suggestions? That's the right answer. So when you look at the packaging of these resources, number of tables, number of resources that you have, stored procedures, users, everything can be packaged as a DAC-pack file. Data tier application component, that's called as DAC. So we are packaging that resource, that's why it's called as DAC-pack. Let's go to the third question. What is the role of Azure pipelines in Azure DevOps services? It can help you build, test, deploy code, continuous integration, use pipelines to encrypt data. Pipelines are used to store data. I think this should be a straightforward kind of thing. So most of them have said A, which is correct. So I showed you all the resources here. where you have Azure boards, Azure pipelines, Azure repos. All these are components of your Azure DevOps services. Okay. So anyone, any questions in whatever we have discussed till now? So go through the topics that we have discussed. Any questions anywhere? Do let me know. So I have already shared the respective links with you all. From the applied skill perspective, I have also shared the link for the course where you all can see the respective learn modules. I'm sure by now everybody has redeemed the badges for it. I shared the link for the labs. So once you all have the trial account, you all can try out these labs. So go through the initial 2 modules that we have covered. Anyone, any questions in those modules? If you have not redeemed the badge, I'll put the link once again, which will help you all redeem the badge. So like I mentioned, so once you have redeemed your badge, you can publish it on LinkedIn, you can make it available on your profile. I don't see any questions. Okay, thank you very much everyone. Thank you very much once again for sneaking out your valuable time. I'm sure all of you all have got the gist of DP-3020. So for any further details, you all can write back to us, connect to our team. Please provide in your valuable feedback. Don't hesitate to rate us high. If you have any feedback, any inputs, please do mention the same. So Anmay, over to you.